This is a very serious topic. I think we shouldn't have talked about this after break because then people are very relaxed, right? But risks are very real. Risks are so real that I need to tell you a very sad story. On the night of October 24th, an Israeli strike hit a village in Gaza, and a 41-year-old doctor without border staff, his name is Hassan Sabo, lost his life. The unsung heroes of many international and local humanitarian organizations, they deal with risk, a lot of risk, and they are very real, 24/7, day in, day out. The risks they are dealing with are very diverse, and they are also very intertwined if you look at this. For instance, their security risk, meaning violence and crime, would impact on how they operate, leading to a lot of operational risk. And if you look at operational risk in detail, because they're a humanitarian organization, there's one thing they are very, very conscious about not doing, which is to inadvertently creating harms. They need to make sure they don't create harms. And if they did though, unfortunately, sometimes harms happen, right? And that would have a spiral effect on fiduciary risk, reputational risk, and legal and compliance risk. So the risk environment is very dynamic. And 8 years ago, this survey result came out. This 8 years ago. The question asked to the 325 respondents of international humanitarian organization was, your opinion on whether NGOs have becoming increasingly risk averse? And the answer was yes, for over 70% of the respondents. Fast forward to 2024, I believe that with the wars in the Middle East and Ukraine, and also increasing natural disasters and disease breakout, that the risk adversity has increased, but the need for humanitarian organizations' involvement has also increased exponentially. And risk management is indeed at the heart of what these organizations do. Then you say, hey, April, yes, I know, these organizations, they deal with a lot of risk. But Hong Kong is not a war zone. Hong Kong is not Gaza. What's the relevance of these organizations' work to me? Why is that relevant? And my answer to this is no, their work is super relevant to any NGO in the world because it is exactly because risk is very serious, is at the heart of what they do, that across so many life and death situations, they need to come up with something that is so practical, something that is so easily to be understood, and something that can be so quickly implemented in all situations. Remember, they are at the field, right? You have a bomb exploding next door. You need to react immediately. So their risk assessment and risk mitigation is very practical. And I would like to share with you what they have done to assess and mitigate risk in the organizations. Hopefully I can give you some good ideas of what we could do. First thing, risk register. So what happened is that a lot of these organizations use risk register as an analytical tool and also a blueprint for action. What happened is they usually have 2 tiers of risk register. One is at the organization level, and the second one is the project or field level. Okay, let's say Gaza is a project site, or Ukraine is a project site, so they have different projects, right? So each has its own risk register. So what they do is that they make sure that they deliberate with their entire organizations, right? So that people can share their views on the different risk and different levels at the corporate level. And then they also developed individual risk registry at the location. Importantly, what they would do is that they will take operational decisions and prioritize different activities using that registry. So that is something that they use. It's not sitting on the shelf. That is something they use daily. And they make sure that they use it to guide their daily decisions. And very importantly, what they would do is that they do regular review. So they do audit. They check whether people indeed study that risk, assess the risk, and make sure that the mitigation is in place, because it's life or death situation, right? So they don't only create the risk register, they also audit the risk register from time to time to make sure that it is still relevant. So otherwise, it's only a paper exercise, right? And this is something we could do, right? We can create something at the organization level, and for each project, we think about specific risk. Very straightforward. Now, second recommendation is that they provide brief and user-friendly tools for field setting. Imagine you are running a hospital, right, in a war-torn country. And if I give you a very big menu of how to measure risk and how to mitigate risk, I don't think that would work. And that's why they produce a lot of very simple one-pager, really one page, about, okay, this is the project risk. These are the high-risk area, and these are the mitigations, and these are the residuals. And they practice this, they carry this to the different site. And my question to you is that even though we don't run, we are not in a war zone, right? As a project manager in your organization, do they really have that one pager to guide them through decisions? Do they have the one pager like Judy's, right, sports program, to have the one pager to tell them that which are the high risk area they need to pay attention to? If the answer is no, then I think it would be a very good practice to produce a one pager instead of creating a very complex metrics and also assessment. Third thing, cataloging missteps and realized risks. So this is from one of the international NGOs. The senior management came up with a very good initiative, because a lot of the times NGOs had a lot of missteps. They made a lot of mistakes, right? And then these mistakes, they were not documented. Even though they were documented, they were not communicated. So the CEO came with a good idea, is that I'm going to document everything. I'm going to do a sharing with all the people in the organization. And they all learn what happened. It could be a near miss, right? That nothing bad happened, but they need to prevent the mistakes from happening. Or it could be something really bad happen. They learn together, right? So that they don't let it happen twice. And this is super powerful because it creates a common understanding. It creates great transparency. And people in the past, they only learned about those mistakes or missteps, right, through rumors or hearsay. Somebody said something, right? They don't have the full picture. This is very powerful. So their recommendation is that you catalog all those mistakes or missteps and you share that openly with your people and make sure you take risks very seriously as an organization in managing your project. Lastly, pre-mortems, charging possible risks and potential responses, meaning that you just play, the most negative guy, right, in a room and think of all the bad things that can happen to you when you start a project. So think negatively. And today, you don't need to be super creative because we have AI too, right? Go ask ChatGPT. Give them your project charter, upload your project charter and tell me all the possible risks, the scariest one that could happen. I can guarantee you they come with very good ones, that would really, really give you very good ideas of how to manage, right, that risk. So use technology. Okay, this is very important. So these are some promising ideas that the international NGOs came up with. I hope that is useful and they are very practical. And question as a leader, we should ask, right, is that what kind of risk could happen? And what if it really happens or if it doesn't happen, right? I think that's a very key question. Sometimes we only ask whether people have a risk registry, but we never ask them, is it real? So this question is test whether this is a reality. Now, I think I have shared a very sad, very high-risk story, right? I would like to invite our panel on stage again to share a little bit more how their organization manage project risk. So welcome Marcus, Victoria, and Judy. Cool. The vertically challenged people. Good. Now I have my experience. Question. This is targeted to Judy because I know you do a lot of work around risk management. So Judy, can you further explain your approach of risk management and mitigation?
Also, hello everyone, welcome back. Hope you're not yet too sleepy. I know it's like middle of the afternoon after tea time, so I'll try to be precise and concise. So risk management is not fun, okay? It's nothing fun, so I know it might not be the best topic after break time. So first of all, we do have the risk register, this system. So we do have our risk map. I have actually printed it out and bring it here today. So this is like our risk register.
Oh, you do a 5 by 5?
Yeah, with 10 items, with 10 risk items with priority. So we do that every half a year during our risk and compliance committee meeting. So we have one board member responsible for our risk register. And then the senior management team and also some of the project staff, they will also join this half a year risk and compliance meeting. And then in that meeting, we talk about organization risk. We don't just talk about project risk, right? For example, turnover, for example, different types of risk. And then when it comes to project execution, it's good that as an organization responsible person or as a project lead, you can always refer to this risk register as a reference, right? About to start thinking about the project risk. Say, for example, our organization's risk, number one is always about child protection, right? As I just mentioned, harm and abuse of children is our most important and number one risk. And then if I execute a new project, then I need to first look at, this is our organization's number one risk, then it might also be our project number one risk. So I think this can be a good reference, can be a good tool to refer to. But of course, this tool doesn't mean everything, right? You can't just look at this tool and say you have already assessed all the risks. So let's also be practical. You can ask the project responsible to talk to different stakeholders, like call up the beneficiaries or ask the beneficiaries what are they most concerned about. Or you can ask people who have organized similar events, similar projects, and ask about the risk. Say, for example, we have a brand new project with a new funder. It's about running water sports, urban sports, and mountain sports all together in one program. So we haven't had any experience running mountain sports. And also they are higher risk. Say, for example, cliff zip line project, cliff zip line, and then abseiling, these kind of higher risk sports activities. So the team responsible for this particular project, they will first look at the child protection risk. And we also need to look at the beneficiaries, right? We actually have SEN students joining this program. So we also need to talk to parents in advance to get their consent. And we also need to talk to coaches. Maybe we should arrange 2 more coaches if we have quite a number of SEN students joining. So I think the risk register only serves as a guideline or overarching umbrella for you to think of the items. But then we need the project staff to look at the content of the projects and to think of unique risks associated with that particular project. But let's also be pragmatic. You don't spend too much time in risk assessment, okay? You don't just go to work and assess the risk and not really executing the project, right? So just spend reasonable time and don't be too overly pessimistic about those risks. Just plan and think ahead, but then you go ahead executing your project with a big smile. I think that's also very important, that we are not too overly cautiously pessimistic and worried about the execution of the project.
Thank you, Judy. And that is the international NGO, right? 2-tier. You have the organization level and specific project, right? Thank you. And who would like to share, some ideas on risk management?
I can go quickly because I don't have much to say. I'm almost ashamed to say that we don't, and I should be ashamed to say that at a project management discussion. Our organization doesn't do that much risk management or assessment. And I promise I'll fix that. But I think the way it happens with us, it's a little bit more organic, which is a nicer way of saying it's disorganized. But I think at the beginning I mentioned that I try not to take a role in project management, right? And I guess that gives me an external and outsider role, just to poke holes in whatever execution that my team is working on. Have you considered this? What if that happens? So that's sort of one layer of gatekeeping. The other way we do risk management or risk assessment or some sort of risk thinking is that we work with our partners. Sometimes we do a lot of school programs, so definitely work with the teachers or the social workers. They know what their students need best. They know, they have a bunch of regulations that they need to observe and a bunch of safety measures they have to be in place. So we learn from our partners. So that's another thing. And I think the third thing that I wanted to mention is that the reason that we don't do a whole lot of risk management is because sometimes we're too busy firefighting. We're too busy implementing the project. We don't have the time to think about the risk or what if things doesn't go right. And that's probably the reality of some of you here. And I guess that brings me to always thinking about what is urgent and what is important. Executing the project is obviously urgent because there's timeline, there's funders breathing down your neck, there's reports to be filled in, but also important organizational risk, especially very important stuff. So I promise that I will do better on that, and hopefully if you guys are in the same situation, you're not alone. Let's all work together.
I just love this panel discussion because they're very honest and they share a lot of very true stories. They're all true stories. Thank you. Victoria, anything to add?
We're probably somewhere in between, and that maybe reflects our organizational maturity. So, well, you know me, I always bring it back to well-being. I think the benefit of having some processes for risk management is if you don't have that, it's all in your head. You're catastrophizing in your head, and it's better to get that out, and have it sitting somewhere so that it's not in your head. So again, I'm going to bring it back to that. But we moved from a founding board to a second gen board last year. And it was interesting because we brought on someone who is specialized in risk and governance in the corporate sector. And one of the things that we started doing was in the board management reports that we send before every board meeting, we actually had a more dedicated section to risk. We used a 5x5 matrix. Your feedback gives me thought about maybe we're guilty often of making things more complicated than they need to be. So I might take that on board. And then one of the things that we did this year, mid-year, was he did a bit of a kind of upskilling and training for senior management on developing a risk registry. And we thought, hey, why don't we start off with this new pilot project that we're running in secondary schools, precisely because of the child protection and safeguarding dimension. And so we've done it for the project, and we're recruiting a skilled volunteer who's going to help me develop the first kind of more organizational risk registry. So actually I'm looking at Judy's paper and I'm like, oh, can you let me glance at it later? One interesting thing is for a grant application that we put forward last year, for a new project, you know the kind of standard questions that are asked, like what's your logical framework and what's the objectives and da da da. They didn't ask any question on risk, and I remember being quite surprised by that. And I actually asked, do you mind if we actually include a section on this? Because I think we would benefit from that. And so we did that proactively. And I think, and for me, again, it's not just risks, but also assumptions that we're making, and then testing whether those prove to hold up later on.
Yeah.
Just a very quick point to add. When I talk to funders, I always hope they could include an additional budget item, and that is sponsoring governance for NGOs instead of just impact measurement and salary of staff.
Interesting.
Maybe we could add an additional item saying that improving governance. That include risk management. That include all the other stuff like privacy issues. All these
Completely
governance.
agree. Completely.
And maybe that's an interesting thing that we can talk to donors, adding extra 2%. Or maybe 2.5%, that's I think we can negotiate.
And if you talk risk assessment, they can't say no, right? Because this is something that is very close to their heart too, right?
Because a lot of these things honestly aren't funded, and yet they're critical for being able to execute the problem in an accountable way.
So scope it in, right? Say scope it in, very important.
Yeah. One of the funnest questions I like asking in job interviews is, what's the biggest crisis you've ever had to handle? We ask that standard thing, and it's very, one, you get some really interesting stories, but two, you kind of get a mindset of how people handle risk and crisis, and I think that's also important to kind of recruit for as well.
Yeah, it's true, right? You have a risk register, you have one pager, but you still need the person to execute on those things, right?
and a certain mindset in dealing with those uncertainties, because there isn't a universe where there's no risk. This is the thing that is important to really understand. So you have to be able to navigate that.
Good. And I just have a few things to add. Thank you for being so honest, Marcus. And I'm not asking everybody to have a 5x5, but a 3x3 is a good start. And people say, why do you do this? Because I come from a for-profit world. I do a lot of commercial projects. And the way we see risk is that, risk is actually the cost of doing business. You can spend a lot of money to mitigate risk, but does it make sense anymore? Does your project fly? Does it make more money? If not, then it kills the business case. So there is always a very fine balance of how much you put into the risk plan and how much you use to mitigate a plan. So it's always, you remember the triple constraint? It has a cost element to everything we do. So maybe we just scope right when we reduce our scope so that we reduce our risk. And one thing though, that say 3x3, 4x4, 5x5, it could be that you have different level of projects. Some deserve higher risk attention, some just simple 3x3 would help. So you need to make the judgment. So there is no recipe. And with this, I'm gonna bring out the next exercise, which is multitasking, right? So now I'm not the moderator. I am the facilitator. So thank you, Victoria, Marcus, and Judy. And we are going to do a small exercise with the team here. But before that, I received a lot of questions on, risk metrics. So I'm going to talk about this. First of all, risk. Risk is not always bad. Risk can be positive. Positive risks are called opportunities in business terms, okay? So don't always think bad things. Good things can happen too. And I explained already, right? For 3x3, you have low, medium, and high. For example, it's low likelihood and low severity is a low risk, it's green. Then you don't need to do anything. You don't need to mitigate. If it is a high risk, for example, it is 3 when it comes to severity, right? And then it's 2 comes to likelihood, it is a high risk. If you see any red color, that means that you need to stop and think. You need to ask for help. You need to put your project on hold and make sure that you address that before you move on, okay? Very simple. Traffic light, no ambiguity. And I give you one very practical example. This is an organization that organized bird watching tour, okay? Environmental NGO, right? So bird watching tour in Taipo to arouse public interest in bird watching and conservation. The risk is a positive risk. More than 40 people sign up, right? They show up on a day, but we don't have enough transport. So they classify it as a medium likelihood because they see a lot of interest in social media. They know it is very popular. And the severity is very high because if everybody shows up and then nobody got the transport, then people get very upset. And this is a new NGO. So that this is something that is going to make or break it. As such, they rank it high and they say, there are mitigation actions. So let's say if we have more people, we need more guys, right? And the NGO CEO can be the guy at 0 cost. That's what a lot of NGOs are doing, right? Providing free services. Or they say, I can book another coach ad hoc at 850 Hong Kong dollars. So you can pay money to mitigate risk, right? But of course, you need to check whether they have available coaches, right, to begin with. Let's say the finance guy, you're always a finance guy in the organization. No, I'm not going to pay more money, right? So under the circumstances that your finance guy don't want to pay, then what can you do? There are some mitigation actions. For example, let's make it first come, first serve, right? Or let's make RSVP, right? So that people will need to book in advance. Or that you can order them Uber at their own cost when they arrive. So there are ways to mitigate at no cost. And afterwards, you have residual risk at very low level. Residual risk will be after the mitigation actions, whether it is still high, medium, or low, okay? If after mitigation is still high, that means you don't do this project. It's too high risk for your organization, okay? Make sense? This is a very simple example. If you can put this in place for your project, you just think of 2 or 3 weeks, 2 or 3 risks, you are going to get very far. If you put this in your fund proposal, right, you are going to get very far too, because they see that you have risk in your mind. So with this, I would introduce the next exercise. Stephanie, please come help us with that.
Thank you, April.